Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the June meeting of the Joint Commission on Public Ethics. I will say in advance, we have a very abbreviated public agenda today, so in case anybody was hoping for lengthy debates on things, we don't have them teed up for you today, so I apologize. Nevertheless, we have our agenda items, so let's just get through it. Item 1 is approval of the minutes from the May public session behind attachment A in the book. Any comments or questions? Hearing none. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved. Commissioner
Thank you. We have multiple movements and seconds. All in favor?
Can you, do you want to vote on the minutes, Commissioner Deering?
Commissioner Deering, we've lost you again. But
Got him on FaceTime. We can see him here in Albany.
Okay, great.
okay,
We confirm it's him.
so that's unanimous. Thank you.
We got both unanimous.
What is called item 3 on the agenda, report from staff.
Just a couple of items, Mr. Chairman. First, we will have the legislature's filings by next week, just in the FDS area. We're going to post the elected officials on our website very shortly afterwards. We're also busy working on compliance for statewide officers, candidates for statewide office in the legislature. So that's currently part of our outreach program. In the general area of outreach in the educational area, we're moving forward on our CLE program in October. It looks like it's going to be on lobbying, we also will be publishing a semi-annual newsletter as we do in July. And just finally, we are continuing our ethics trainings, specific trainings tailored for agencies. We're trying to do some of this on an agency-by-agency basis where our educational staff can present hypotheticals and examine situations that are often either unique to or specially found in agencies. So that's an ongoing process. But that's what we have at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Item 4, attachment B, legislative activity.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm going to let Martin take the laboring oar on this, but just as, to take it off a bit, there was a piece of legislation passed by both houses amending the executive law. It specifically would require a filing by public individuals identified by an agency as policymakers. A list of those individuals would be filed with the Department of State based on their 73A FDS filings, and then each agency would be required to essentially talk about what percentage of those individuals filing are women. And that is the ostensible purpose of that legislation. We have an opportunity to take a deeper dive into it, and I'll let Martin talk about our analysis and some of the issues that we've identified for the Commission's consideration.
All right. Thank you, Seth. As Seth mentioned, the new legislation that's yet to be delivered to the governor but has passed both houses would create essentially a duplicative process to what agencies do for JCOPE right now when they submit their annual list of policymakers for financial disclosure purposes. The only difference in the substance of the report would be that they would now be required in this separate filing to the Department of State to include the distribution of policymaking positions across the genders. So that would be an additional data point at each agency that we don't currently receive. Certainly a worthwhile endeavor. However, we've, at the staff level, identified a couple of defects that we think would ultimately raise more questions than it would answer. So I'll go through those very quickly for you. First, the issue is, when agencies are required to disclose their policymakers to JCOPE every year, in February, I might add, they do that under the definition of state agency in the Public Officers Law, and they do that under the definition of a policymaking position, which is created which is determined by the agency based on guidance that JCOPE distributes every year to the agencies. So you have this definitional regime already in place. What the legislation does is create parallel definitions for state agency and policymaking position that are certainly not identical to what JCOPE uses. And I think, as prescribed by the Public Officers Law, and we are concerned that that will create the impression, one, that an agency might feel like if it doesn't need to comply with the Department of State requirement, and therefore it might not feel like it needs to comply with the JCOPE requirement, which is wholly independent. It would create confusion in terms of the public as to which agencies are covered and which policymakers are covered. And like I said, it's a duplicative endeavor by the agencies. One of the other problems that it has is that in defining state agencies, there's certain deliberate exclusions. One is the legislature, which is currently covered under the Public Officers Law to JCOPE. And two is the definition would arguably not include SUNY and CUNY. So when you think about the universe of agencies and filers to JCOPE, we get over 30,000 filers every year. And those come from between 400 and 600 different state agencies, or entities, rather. Over half of those 30,000 are policymakers. So we are talking about a substantial population. And once you create a parallel population of something that size, it's inevitably going to create confusion, if not for the agencies, then definitely for the public. What staff has identified as a way to sort of achieve these goals without the unnecessary problems created is, while JCOPE does receive this information every year, under our enabling statute at Executive Law Section 9419, we are explicitly limited in what information we can make public. And this commission has, over the years, interpreted this provision narrowly and has not included these written instruments that the agencies submit every year that include their policymakers. What we recommend as a possible solution to offer would be that the executive law for JCOPE, that is Section 9419, be amended to simply add these lists of policymakers among the information that JCOPE may make public. We would also recommend, of course, that you match the definitions up to the Public Officers Law so that everybody's looking at the same criteria, that the universe of agencies be the same, so you have your SUNY and your CUNY and the legislature included. You line up the due dates, obviously, to February of every year. And then, of course, you add the statistic about the distribution of policymaking positions across the genders. This would create every piece of information that the legislation is endeavoring to collect without creating a parallel regime, without creating confusion, without duplicating efforts, and additionally providing sufficient public information. So the commission obviously can take a number of tacks, but I'll let Seth discuss the out.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. We're collecting the information, have us make it public, and then add the additional information rather than having a whole different regimen. And there are...
Hold on. Hang on 1 second. The ORC is having trouble hearing you. I just need to make sure what's going on. Okay. I don't know what the problem is.
Pete and Commissioner Deering, do you hear us okay?
Oops. Should we have everybody dial back in?
Let me ask him if he can hear.
Well, if he could hear, he would say.
Someone just...
Yeah.
Is anybody on this call?
Yes, Buffalo's on.
Okay.
Commissioner Deering, are you on?
Lori, something happened when we reconnected with Deering.
Okay. Tell New York.
As Buffalo goes, so
Tell New
goes the
York
state.
to dial back in,
Okay, you guys need to dial back in.
and I'll have Commissioner Deering.
And we'll have
dial back in.
Commissioner Deering dial back in.
Mine's
Okay.
gonna start all over again.
Okay.
We'll be fine.
Yes. The one we normally use, yes.
Yeah, the same one.
Okay. Good.
As far as New York knows, I was brilliant.
It should be, yes, if that's what you got, yeah. No. The one, the normal.
in Albany? Okay, yes, please, dial back in. Yeah, thank you.
Walter, what's going on with New York City?
They were disconnected from the conference line somehow.
So was Commissioner Deering. They're
They're
both
calling
joining
back in.
They're joining the call back. Need be, I'll reconnect the call.
Well, I think it's just them.
I don't know why, because Pete's on.
I wish we had some nice hold music.
There we go.
Can you guys hear us?
Yes, we can.
Okay, we're just waiting for Commissioner Deering to get back on.
Yes.
Got you back. Okay.
The tin
So
can.
Martin,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we lost you when you were starting to talk about the proposal.
Okay.
So the last thing we heard you say was that 94 restricts what the commission can make public.
Okay.
Excuse me for 1 second. Can you make sure that
Okay.
Commissioner Deering can hear us? Okay, fine.
I think the tin can with the string is connected between us, so we can go forward.
Okay.
Everything after that was brilliant. So the short answer is what we are proposing at the staff level is a sort of an alternate legislative proposal that would expand the information in Executive Law 9419 to include these statements of financial disclosure policymakers that agencies submit as included in the information that JCOPE may make public. Also to add the distribution of policymaking positions across the gender to those statements. It would simply reuse the information that we're getting, add this data point, and include all the same agencies and individuals.
Yeah, and as I was saying, what we're asking the Commission for, essentially the proposal we're suggesting is rather than reinventing the wheel, we have it. We've got a device where we're collecting this information anyway. Have us make it public. We'll make it public on the website rather than having individual requests piecemeal coming in from the public, and add this additional data point and make the same set of entities that are already responsible for filing financial disclosure statements like SUNY and the legislature also have this information available. Because we think it's a very, at least it's certainly it's a good goal to figure out what this distribution is if one has a fair view of what the realm of state employees are. We're asking permission from the Commission to authorize the filing of essentially what when I was in the chamber, we call it a 10-day memo or a memorandum on the legislation suggesting changes to be made and identifying issues when this legislation arrives on the governor's desk.
Mr. Chair and Seth, is there any way we can read 19A1 at least broad enough to lay out, we can't get all the data points that the legislation wants, but can we read it broad enough to lay out by agency who the policymakers are and put that out on our website? Because
Yeah, I'm sorry.
only because it's the does the information in the FDS state that people are policymakers?
No, it does not.
I believe the answer to that is no.
It doesn't. That's information we get. The agencies are charged under the law with identifying policymakers. So that's not information that's included in the financial disclosure
Is there any
statements.
way we can read that broad enough to take the information that is given to us by the agencies and then use it to create this list based on the FD, just to get this started?
Oh, I understand.
You know, this is obviously the legislature, you know, I'd say this is an absolute good faith attempt to do something. They may have been somewhat unaware of the parallel structures they were actually creating.
I think the problem is, first of all, it talks about information. This is a fairly carefully circumscribed legislation. And it talks about the information in the annual statement of financial disclosure. And I think it's the information within that annual statement of disclosure is exactly that. because when there are other items that we're entitled, or other information that we're entitled to or required to disclose, it's fairly specific. I think it doesn't solve the problem of having a different definition of policymaker, which is what the statute sets up as opposed to our situation. I think if there was a way we could do it, I think that would certainly be something we would look at, but I think this is such a narrowly prescribed piece of legislation. That being said, the executive on his own can require agencies to disclose who their policymakers are, and they don't need our help. They don't need legislation to require this kind of disclosure, because the legislation itself doesn't impact the legislature is specifically carved out.
Yeah.
I think,
And the executive couldn't demand, if he did it, administratively, that the legislature disclose. That's the separation of powers issue.
Exactly. So, I mean, it is limited. It could be done without legislation, and perhaps if it was done that way, we wouldn't have the disparity in definitions. But to achieve the goals of this legislation, and the bill memo is clear, it's to identify the percentage of women who have been at least identified for financial disclosure purposes as policymakers. I think you've got to keep that definition the same, and we already have an agency that has been working very well in terms of identifying that. We've got the machinery here, and to post that information on our website, if the legislature would authorize it, we don't create a whole new bureaucratic structure in the Department of State either. We've got all of that set up here ready to go.
Plus, another point to make is that just logistically, agencies have, for years and years, prepared these lists for us every February. So if they're suddenly creating a new list in January, they may not have the information assembled just from an administrative standpoint. So you're pushing up from February 28th to January 1st, certainly is a big jump.
Yeah. So ultimately, what we're asking for is it's something that hasn't been done, at least in recent times, which is simply the ability or the authority to contact and write an old-fashioned bill memo, just analyzing the bill, identifying the issues, and recommending solutions to the issues without recommending any further action on the part of the executive in it, but certainly to make that dialogue.
So something along the lines of no recommendation, no position, but laying out the issues.
Exactly, and corrections, possible alternatives.
Yeah.
And that's the suggestion that we'd be making.
Commissioner Jacob doesn't lost his voice, so he's asking if I could raise whether or not the commission could interpret 949-A as allowing the commission to authorize this, making the information public. As we've discussed as a commission in the past, the way that we've interpreted 949-A is that the commission can authorize confidential communications, but it does not. That provision does not allow the commission to make public what is confidential. But Commissioner Jacob asked that I raise the point for discussion. So we're talking about section 949-A-B. And the last sentence, which reads, any confidential communication to any person or entity outside the commission related to the matters before the commission may occur only as authorized by the commission.
And Monica, just to summarize your point, that confidential that communication being authorized by the commission is a confidential communication that you're talking about having the authority to authorize.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I guess
Exactly.
Well, is Martin?
I don't know how you could interpret making something public on the website as a confidential communication.
Well,
that's the position that we've discussed in the past, but
can Commissioner Jacobs, I'm sorry he's lost his voice, position be that other than what's releasable under FOIL in 19, that everything else can be read as confidential? I mean, is that the point that he's trying to make?
Yes.
I'm not sure I follow.
Yes.
He said yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Jacobs said yes.
And so and that may be one available legal avenue to at least look at in trying, in trying to at least assist the legislature and the executive in implementing something that was well intended but had some unintended consequences.
I'm not sure, I mean, I'm not sure I understood the argument that everything other than what's in 19
Is viewed as confidential.
is confidential. So then if it is confidential, how does what's the
Well,
argument
then-
for how the commission?
Well, I think if I hate to speak for Commissioner Jacob, I am in the wrong pair of shoes for that. But if everything else is confidential, then we can authorize it.
Well, I think the point, Monica, if I'll play Monica.
Yeah.
If you're playing. We're all switching roles here. I think the point that is made is that the authorization is for a confidential communication.
Particular, you're saying.
But yeah. That's what it may authorize, which it doesn't say any communication to any person outside may occur as authorized. It says a confidential communication, and so that authorizes, as we do in the course of investigations, strictly confidential as opposed to public. I think if there was an opportunity in the law to bang that wide open, I think we would all jump at it. Unfortunately, the way the statute is written, it is limited to those confidential communications. So I think that's where the language is, not the confidential information, but confidential communications, which is what can be authorized. I mean, these are certainly things that we can raise with the. Lord only knows when this is going to come for the governor's signature. Although one can guarantee it'll come somewhere on or before December 31st, and then he can deal with it. But we can certainly have discussions about other ways of dealing with the permission of the commission. Engage in those discussions if there are ways of addressing these concerns.
Do you need a motion to do this, or can you just do it without?
I think if we had a consensus of the commission I personally think if there's permission for us to, this is not a confidential, we're doing it in public, but I think if the commission is supportive of it, a vote would be helpful when we go speak to folks and know that the commission is certainly interested in us pursuing, as I said, something that we all agree is a worthy goal, but there may be better ways and easier ways of dealing with it.
So you need a motion.
I would ask if you would make one.
I'll put the motion, don't ask me to phrase it.
If I can suggest that the motion is you can authorize staff to enter into communications with the executive and legislature about this legislation to discuss its merits.
And maybe
alternatives.
and maybe even somebody like Bob Freeman, who has some really good ideas as to how to deal with this
We
stuff.
can certainly reach out to Bob.
because
That would be a great
he's only
idea.
been doing this for about 44 years.
And he'll get good at it.
Yes.
By the 45th year. No, I think it's a very good idea. So that would be the motion.
I'll be happy to second it.
Okay, good.
Wait, do we have a motion? Has someone moved?
Yes.
Yep.
Commissioner Sample.
Yeah, Commissioner Sample, you're just tucked behind, so I couldn't see you there. I apologize.
Small.
All right, all in favor?
That's my life. That's always, no problem. It always happens.
Authorized discussions with the executive and the legislature and Bob Freeman concerning this proposed legislation.
All in favor?
New York City,
Commissioner Deering and Albany.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, it's
Bob,
unanimous.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, we'll do that.
Item 5, new and other business. Do we have any?
There's none here, Chair.
Okay. Great, so that concludes this part of the executive session. Can I have a motion, please? The public session. Can I have a motion, please, to enter into executive session? Thank you, Commissioner Jacob. Thank you for the second. All in favor? Commissioner Knox?
New York City,
Albany.
Buffalo and Commissioner Deering. Unanimous.
that's unanimous.
Okay, unanimous. Thank you.
It's on hold.
Public session.
No. What's the date?
Are we back?
We are, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. In executive session, we discussed litigation matters, authorized communications regarding FDS compliance, approved 3 settlement agreements, authorized steps in several investigative matters, including closing 2 matters, and discussed several other investigative matters. At this time, I need a motion to adjourn, please. Thank you, Commissioner Jacobs. Second, Commissioner Yates. All in favor?
Richard Deering? In favor? Buffalo?
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. See you next month.
Have a good holiday, all.
When is the meeting?
Thank you.